And so I did become a respiratory therapist. The first person, I worked at Hempstead General while I was in my second year. And we had to do code blues, which is when somebody had their heart stops and you ran to wherever they were and tried resuscitating them. That was part of being a respiratory therapist. Getting an air tube in or putting an ambu bag to get oxygen in. And the first time that ever happened to me was the abortion clinic that was in this hospital. And I remember it like today. They called it and I ran up there. I was the first person to get there. And I knew it was important to oxygenate them. So one of the skills that I had learned was to intubate a patient. To intubate means to take a tube and put it down their throat into their lungs. And I started doing that. And as I was looking down and trying to get it in, the emergency room doctor came in and he pressed on the abdomen of the woman, and all the fluids in her from her stomach came up into the throat and blocked my vision and went into her lungs. I looked at him, I said, "What the fuck?" You know? I'm trying to intubate her. And once again, I tried to get suction and tried to clean. And then I did it, and again, he presses down on her, and fluids come up again. I screamed again, and then I just did it and realized it's getting too late. And I started with an ambu bag with oxygen. I just started squeezing, trying to put oxygen in. And she died. The girl died. Very young. And I'm like, fucked. I'm just distraught. I'm shaken. I call my boss, and he says, "Look, just lay low," because I was the only guy on, right? It was a small hospital. It wasn't like you had 10 respiratory therapists. So he told me to hide out, and if they need me, go, but otherwise, just hang out. And I did. I got through it. Then I went out. My next job when I graduated was I was going to travel the world. I loved the thought of traveling, and I hitchhiked out west. But I stopped in Dayton, Ohio to see an old girlfriend from when I went to go to school. I loved her. I was just in love with her all the time. And she convinced me to stay because she got a job in Dayton, Ohio at a children's hospital with one of our teachers one of our professors who got the job there as the head of the department. And I did. I stopped and became a respiratory therapist at a children's hospital. And talk about pain. Talk about the sadness and the futility of the fate of so many of these families and children. No matter what I could do, I learned that if someone was going to die, nothing was going to change. One person who seemed to have the identical thing you could work on, and they'd live, and the next person, they'd die. No rhyme or reason, just sort of the trick of destiny. And then to watch this family crumble. Because I was a respiratory therapist, I did hands-on chest physical therapy with lots of children who had cystic fibrosis. You had to smack them in certain positions where gravity would take the tubes and you'd be helping clear their lungs. And then you'd be vibrating your hands, testing, getting them, tightening your hands so much that they shook and like a little vibrator. I'm sure they use machines nowadays for it. That's probably the same thing with the tapping. I wish I invented it. I wouldn't have had to work all my life. But now I think of it. But the thing is that you became friends because the family would go, "You're doing it wrong," What? No, I'm doing it. No, you're not. Mom, show them how to do it, and all of a sudden you'd learn and get better and get close to these people. Because I learned one thing. No matter what I did with the patient, no matter what I gave them medicine or did chest physical therapy, my biggest positive action was my attitude, was me being positive and smiling when I came in and being friendly and telling jokes and telling stories. That was more effective, I believe, than anything I would do medically. I mean, medical might help. I'm not trying to say it didn't. But as a human being, and so I'd become close with these people. And then, once in a while, they die. And, well, my career had trials and tribulations. One time at the hospital, I was going to the hospital, and I saw a hitchhiker, a young kid, teenager, and I picked him up. And there I get caught behind a railroad crossing, and we're waiting and waiting. The kid says to me, "Hey, I know a way around this." And he gets me to turn around, and we go parallel, and he gets me through a tunnel, under the railroad tracks. And I let him off at the hospital because I'm here. He goes, "This is good enough." And well, months later, I went to visit this girlfriend who was doing a treatment. I think I was going to meet her up for lunch, and I went into the room, and this kid looks at me and says, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You picked me up hitchhiking, and we went around the train." And I looked at him, and he had lost like 20 pounds or something. And I realized, "Oh, yeah, I remember you." And I said, "What are you here for?" He says, "I got some stomach problems." I said, "Okay." Well, I went right out and read the chart, and he had cancer. But at that time, this is just before or after Dr. Kubler-Ross wrote her books about death and dying. We didn't tell cancer patients that they had cancer. You kept it a secret. You didn't want them to despair that they were dying. You didn't let them go through the process. At the end it would be surprise, but anyway, he and I started a relationship. I'd talk a little, I'd go and visit, I'd leave, and he would go in and out of the hospital a couple of times. He'd be gone for months, and then I'd see him again. And I could see he was going downhill. And one day when he was in the hospital, he says, "Ken, can you," we had, because I was a confidant, and he could trust me, one day, in our talking, he says, "Ken, I know I'm dying of cancer." He goes, I said, "You do?" He says, yeah, I've overheard them when they think I'm sleeping. But no one talks to me about it. So I did. We would talk to each other about it, but we'd keep it a secret between him and I. And so now it's one day and he's going to go home. And he says, Ken, can you, the next day he was going home, but he says, Ken, can you check my forehead? It's yellow or something. And he said, come and look in the light in the bathroom. I said, and I didn't think anything of it, right? I go in the bathroom, and he closes the door immediately and lights a joint. Just, whoom! And he starts taking a toke or two, and then he gives it to me. And I look at him, I say, this is not cool. And I take it and I put it out in the sink. And I give it back to him and I say, look, when you get home, smoke it and, think of me. I said, but not here. And I open the door and there's a nurse out there who says, what's going on in there? And I said, he thinks he has something on his forehead and he wanted me to look at it. And I go back into the doctor's office, the room on that floor to write notes of what I had done, not about this incident, but just about the treatments I had given, I just put on charts. And again, the nurse comes in and she says, were you smoking in there? And I said, no, I wasn't. That's all I said. No, I wasn't. I didn't say he was. I said, no, I wasn't. The next day I get a phone call. And the call is from my boss. He said, Ken, there been an incident on, the floor, and they had somebody from the lab go down and they found this substance in the sink. And when they checked it, it was cannabis, indica. And when they found out who was there, it was you. And we want you to come in and meet with the head of the hospital and the head of nursing. And I said, okay. And so I went in, and they asked me what had happened. And I told them the same story I just told you. And they said, I said, he lit a cigarette. I didn't say he lit marijuana. I said, he lit a cigarette. And I told him it wasn't cool and I put it out. Did you know it was marijuana? No, I didn't. I didn't know it. At that time, marijuana was a big no-no. You'd get fired for sure, I said, I didn't. And so I lied, protecting myself. And I said, no. They said, why didn't you tell the nurse? I said, I have a relationship with this guy, and it's built on trust. And I wasn't going to throw him under the bus for something so minor. I said, he's dying of cancer. I said, do you think it matters if he smokes a cigarette? I said, he and I talk, he trusts me, and we've talked about him and his cancer. And I have a relationship with him. And I wasn't going to jeopardize the relationship I have for this. It was a small incident. I didn't think it would get to this point. And they asked me to write it up and sign it and me to be put on probation. And I refused. I said, I'll write it up, but I won't sign it. And my boss said, fine, Ken, that's okay. So I did write what I was sorry, and then. Well, that plus me being just stressed out. Over and over again, I was stressed. Every morning, I'd work the 3:11 shift. And all day long, I'd be vomiting and tense before I had to go to work. And I thought, this is no good. A problem was maybe that I was working with children, but I couldn't take it. I didn't have, they were never the patient in room 413. They always had a name. They always had families. I really cared about them. I couldn't help it. It was just my nature. And I wasn't made for the business. I just wasn't. And I knew it. And so I did quit.